Hello designers, our third video lecture series here. Hopefully you have your digital notes open. Let's get started today talking about stencils. So as a review, remember we have 6 elements of art: line, shape, space, color, texture, value. And this unit is going to focus heavily on space, and specifically positive versus negative space. You have to have a good understanding of what is your positive, what is your negative, or you're going to have a really tough time creating a stencil. When you're done with this lecture tomorrow, when you come into class, we will be starting our next video in Illustrator, which is image tracing. It's going to show you how to create the stencil in Illustrator for this first project. So let's learn about stencil, shall we? So we're basing our inspiration for our stencil art project on street art. Street art is different than graffiti art. If you know anything about graffiti art, it has a long history with tagging and urban areas. But in recent years, it's been elevated, and it's been elevated by the work of one artist in particular, that of Banksy. And I would like you, or I would strongly suggest, I'm not saying you have to, but I would strongly suggest that you stop this video and watch this very short video on Banksy. It's going to give you a little bit more detail into who he possibly is, because the first thing you're going to learn in the video is that we don't exactly know who Banksy is, other than we know he's a British artist. But he got started in the underground art world of street art. So instead of just tagging or graffiti where everything is done by hand, he developed a technique which has flourished, which is using stencils. Stencils have been around forever. He was just the first to really use it heavily within the realm of street art and make it really notable. And why is because street art's still illegal. He had to do it quickly so that he could evade the cops, and rather than standing in the same place for a long time, spraying lots of detail and doing everything by hand, he was able to use a technique that graphic designers developed called the stencil to do his street art very, very quickly. So this is an example you see here of Banksy's work. His work is known to be very political, often talking about consumerism, politics, the left versus right. Even though he is British, he does do a lot of focus on the United States. There's another video here if you want to click on this. This is of a recent series of works he did in New York City, where it was kind of cool. He kind of did a scavenger hunt. So again, if you want to geek out, watch that video there. But you'll notice again, he's dealing with stencils, so he can work really, really quickly to do these highly elaborate. Now it might be more than one stencil, where this was probably just 2 simple stencils, right? Because it's 2 colors. But this one might have been several different stencils, right? Layering on top of each other. And you can do that. And again, nothing new to the art world. Graphic designers have been doing that forever. He is just using it to create street art. You see another example of his here. His often interact with the environment that they're in. And again, they are graffiti. It is still illegal to do. He doesn't get permission from the building owners to do this. But if you're ever curious and you have the time, you might want to check out a documentary that the first video talks about, which is Exit Through the Gift Shop. And you can see it on most streaming services. But it chronicles his evolution in the street art world and talks a lot about the aspect of how street artists have a credibility that gallery artists don't. In other words, they don't sell out, right? They're not making money off of these things. So for some people, street art is more of a pure art form, right? Because they're not making money off of it. But that documentary kind of blurs the lines, and it kind of looks at that idea of consumerism and fine art world. Most of this falls under the realm of fine art, but we're going to use it to create some graphic design because he stole a technique from the graphic design world. We're going to look at him as influence. We're going to go back and turn it back into graphic design. However, Banksy is not the only artist that has done this. About at the same time, I mean literally at about the same time, you have Shepard Fairey. He's kind of like our American version of Banksy, where Banksy is British. Shepard Fairey is born and bred in the United States. He studied at a very prominent art school called RISD, or the Rhode Island School of Design. And I would like you to stop this video and watch this short 12-minute video on Shepard Fairey called Obey This Fill, and then come on back here. Okay, so now that you know a little bit more about Shepard Fairey, you know that he is the man or the brain behind the Obey clothing line. If you've ever been into Zumi shop, you will have seen tons of his work. He is prevalent in the skate board community and the punk community, kind of that underground community, similar to the way Banksy kind of works in the UK. Shepard Fairey kind of lives in that same realm here in the United States. And much like Banksy, he and his work focuses a lot on politics and a lot on war. And in recent years, he's taken up certain causes that are on the left, looking at politics and gender studies and all of the kind of those things. But he also kind of goes between two different worlds where he's still using graphic design. He does street art, but Shepard Fairey now predominantly is more of a gallery artist, and he's doing these more layered versions of stencils. So you can kind of see here, there's multiple layers of stencils. He's doing some other painterly techniques, and I think that comes from his background in fine art at the Rhode Island School of Art and Design. He has an extensive understanding of not just graffiti and graphic design and street art, but fine art and gallery art as well. So what we're going to be doing is we are creating a stencil, and you can see it here. We're going to create a stencil that you could use as street art, but because that's illegal, that's not what we're going to do. You will have your stencil when you're done, but we're going to create a stencil. We're going to use spray paint, but we're just going to use it to create spray paint stencils, t-shirt designs. Okay. So when you are done with this, you will be doing the Illustrator program in class tomorrow. And as you go through that, you need to keep the element of space in the forefront, because you need to make a clear distinction. What is your positive space, which is the foreground? For example, this is the tree, that's the positive space, versus the negative space. It's important because when you create the stencil, I'm going to go back a slide here, you can kind of see here, you have to know where your positive space is, because that's going to be the openings that the laser cuts into the tag board where you spray through. That's then going to make a positive. Okay, this is trippy. So notice here on the stencil, because of the way a stencil works, the empty space, which normally would be negative space, once you spray it on the shirt, then becomes the positive space. But you have to have a clear understanding of what is your positive, what is your negative, because if you don't, pieces and big elements are going to drop out because of these things called channels. You can kind of see it right here, right? So we're going to talk more about that in the video lesson on Illustrator tomorrow when you come in class, and you're going to start creating your stencil. So I want you to have an idea in your mind when you come to class, what do you want on your t-shirt? It can be a simple image. It can be an image with text. Just know that if you do image with text, it's going to be a little bit harder. It's up to you how complex you make this design, okay? But that's the first thing. You're going to think about positive and negative space. So your positive is the object, it's the foreground. Your negative space is the white space. Remember, in graphic design, whatever that empty area or background is, we call it the white space, even if it's not white. When this gets confusing, that positive, negative, you create what's called the Gestalt principle. This is a German expressionist term that means it's the interplay between positive and negative space. In the United States, we typically just call it figure ground. What is the figure? That means what is the positive space, and what is the ground? What is the background area? Positive and negative, okay? So again, figure is your positive space, ground is the negative space. And the Gestalt principle is just the name we've given to this idea of how do we determine what is the figure and what is the ground. And some artists like to play with that Gestalt principle. And if you're a person who's a little bit more gutsy and you want to try something more advanced, you can play with the Gestalt principle so that your foreground and your background flip back and forth. So what do I mean by this? Well, let's take this design, for example. What do you see? If you see a vase, that means the black is the positive and the white areas is the negative. However, if you see two faces looking at each other, these are the positive, the white becomes the positive, and the black becomes the negative. So you can create something with the Gestalt principle, the figure ground, if you want to be more advanced. Here's some more examples of this. This was a great one here. So this is an example of a complex Gestalt principle where the positive and negative space kind of flip-flop back and forth. Or depending on how you look at it, what is the positive? There's not a clear distinction. So you've got one bear here, which is white, but then all of a sudden you have the black, which so it's like, what is the positive, what is the negative space? Or if you look at this one, which is an ad for a Batman movie, if your black is the positive, your positive base is Batman, and the white space is this yellow area. But if you flip it and you look at the other way and you make the yellow space your positive, the black becomes the negative space or the white space. It's now a picture of the Joker, right? Or Penguin. I'm not very good at my superhero stuff, guys. Sorry. So I believe that's supposed to be the Penguin. So if you want to, you can play around with the Gestalt principle. Here's some more examples of that Gestalt principle where it's kind of flip-flopping back and forth between the positive and the negative. However, that's not expectation for you. You can feel free to do something really basic. The only thing that I'm going to suggest here is I don't want to see plagiarized images. So try to avoid doing like Disney characters or anime. Try to come up with something original. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy. It can be a pineapple. It can be a person. But I just want you to try to be as unique and original as a designer as you can. Don't just steal somebody else's design. Not saying you can't do it. You're going to result in a lower score for your originality and creativity if you do that. Okay? So just a little bit of history on stencils. Here is your formal definition. A stencil is just a thin sheet of cardboard, plastic, or metal. Okay, it's basically anything that you cut through, right? You cut through to have openings. Now, old school, before we got the laser cutter, I used to make kids cut these things out with X-Acto blades. And let me tell you, it was a headache for all involved. We now have a laser cutter that we just have to create a digital file, and it will cut these out very, very precise for you. The opening is where your ink or your paint is either sprayed or pressed or rolled through. You use stencils in lots of people who work in industrial interior decorating. They use it for like wall decorations, or if you are even in like working in a bakery, sometimes you'll use it there, or tattoo artists use stencils a lot. Lots of different occupations within the field of art uses this very tried and tested technique, just so that you can replicate things very quickly and easy and very exact. It's been around forever. Like I said, it is not a Western technique. It was developed in China back in 105 AD, and it was a precursor to their other inventions as it relates to printing. And like I said in one of the previous videos, there was just a divide between the East and the West. It didn't mean that the East was any further behind the West. It just meant that we just weren't aware in the West of all the developments that were happening in the East, specifically in China, as it relates to graphic design. And in lots of ways, they were hundreds of years ahead of us. It took us a while to kind of just make those connections. These are some more examples of what you can do with the stencils. I put this one in here to show you that you can even use your stencil a couple different ways. So this is what most of us will be doing. We're going to have our negative space cut out into the tag board. We'll layer it on the shirt. I'll have a demo in class, and you spray through it. However, you could keep what's the negative area here, again playing with this Gestalt principle, so we could keep the cutouts, in other words what would drop out of here like they did here, and spray around those things. So what would happen is the color is around it in the negative space, and the area that it's blocking, the spray paint, would turn into a positive. If you want to do multiple colors, you can. We can talk about that in class, but just let me know if you plan on doing more than one color. For most of us, I would strongly suggest us just doing one color print. However, if you're like, I want more than one color, but I don't want to do more than one stencil, you can do something like this, where it's just one stencil, but they use multiple spray paints across it to do kind of a rainbow roll there. When you come to class tomorrow, like I said, you're going to be doing the image trace in Illustrator. However, if you have been tardy or you missed, if you still have yet to do Illustrator lesson 1, you will need to do that before you do the image trace in Illustrator, because otherwise you're going to be completely lost. So when you come into class tomorrow, we will have a quiz over stencils, and then you will get started on the image trace illustration lesson so that you can learn how to make your stencil in class.